bad boy. Here it is. So right now, the free clock stream, it is sci-fi and relatable non-human protagonists. So with me in this stream, we have Diana Noct, who is the author of Girlbot and Wanderlost. We have Gian Monk, who is the author of Starhammer. Blue Deliquanti, did I get that okay?
Yes, you did. Gold star.
Amazing. So Blue Deliquanti, who is the author of Oh Human Star, and Emmy Bittner, who is the author of Trying Human, which is one of my personal favorites. Please read Trying Human.
Oh, man.
I'm sorry I have a favorite.
That's a lot of pressure.
I'm sorry I have a favorite in this chat. I do. I'm very biased. And I'm, as always, the host, Isabel Malasso, author of Namesake. Really happy to be here. Just to remind everybody that if you're watching this on the Twitch channel, below the Twitch channel, we've got a couple of announcements that you can check out. We currently have a sale in our store for 10% off using the code SPRING2020. We've got 2 Kickstarters running, one for Alice in a Nightmare Book 1 and one for Among Us Book 1. Both are excellent comics. One is a YA introduction to the world of Wonderland, and the other one is a gay romance around the theme of music. Both are excellent. Please check them out. And also shout out to PajamaCon, that is currently being hosted by Iron Circus Comics. So definitely check out their stuff too on Twitter and follow their mini panels and promotions to find really cool artists to support in the wake of Emerald City being canceled. So please buy some cool stuff, listen in, learn things, and enjoy your day. I will leave the floor to Diana, who will be the moderator, but before we start the chat, I would like everybody to sort of give a little 5-minute rundown of what they do and if they have any sales or store or events going on right now.
All right. I guess I'll start. Mine will be relatively brief. The thing I want to announce, well, okay, first of all, the sci-fi relevant thing that I have done is the Intrepid Girlbot, which is about the way I pitch it usually at conventions is it's a robot trying to be a little girl, but she's terrible at it through no fault of her own, but she tries her best. And the thing I wanted to announce is that the website has been down for some time, but I am working on getting it back up now. And now instead of just a blank page, let me see, intrepidgirlbots.com. Instead of just a blank page, now there's a placeholder letting you know that something is happening. It's not, I'll link it in the chat. It's not the most exciting thing. I wanted to have the website sort of up, but I realized that I didn't give Kevin enough time to actually do that. So I hope this will be exciting enough because people have been asking me for a while, like what happened to the website? And as far as I understand, it's just that my copy of WordPress got too goddamn old. The thing is, I couldn't update the WordPress that I had because I was using an old webcomic plugin to run the old site. So basically, I'm having to get it built from the ground up using a new content management system. And Kevin is a wonderful web developer who was taking care of all of that thanks to Hiveworks. So that is my announcement. I also have some things in the store, but I don't have anything particularly new. But that, I think, is exciting news. So on to the next person.
Who wants to go next?
You can go next.
Cool. Okay. My name is Blue Deliquanti. I am the creator of the online comic Oh Human Star, which has been updating online since 2012. It is in its last year. That is a sci-fi related thing. Another sci-fi related thing I'm working on right now is a graphic novel for Random House's new imprint called Across a Field of Starlight. That's coming out in 2022. I'm currently in inking hell for it, but I think about robots all the time. So that's my thing.
Who's next? Me? I guess I'll go. All right. My name's Emmy Bittner, and I write the comic Trying Human, and I draw it too. Cool. And it's about a girl who's being abducted by aliens, and one of the aliens kind of like falls in love with her.
And it's based on a lot of ufology lore and like UFOs and alien abductions, Area 51, all that jazz. Book 3 is about to go into print like in the next few months, sicknesses and viruses and collapse of humanity allowing. And so that's pretty much all that's going on with me. So, yeah.
Thanks for doing all the introductions. Oh, wait, we still have one. Sorry.
My
My sound cut for a bit, so I thought someone talked during that time. My bad.
name is Jay and Monk. I do the webcomic Starhammer, which is sci-fi related. It's about a girl who inherits a powerful alien object and proceeds to make a series of increasingly poor decisions. I also made a book called Topside, which is a sci-fantasy novel about a girl who works inside of a giant artificial planet and is forced to come to the surface for the first time. You can buy that in bookstores or on Amazon. So that's it for me.
I've actually checked out Topside. It's pretty great. I definitely recommend it.
Oh, thank you.
It is wonderful. Like I have a hardcover version of it I bought from you directly, and
That's right.
it's really interesting, and there's like so much in there that I would love to see explored more.
Yeah, we would love to do a sequel to it.
Sequel. All right. Well, thanks for everybody for introducing yourselves. Now it's time to talk sci-fi and relatable non-human protagonists.
All right. Let's see. I wanted to have this to be more of an open discussion. I call it like a roundtable thing, but I just wanted to talk about like why we love sci-fi, why we chose it as a way to tell our particular stories. What for me, like I love thinking about the way that science fiction can convey things. People like I think that in science fiction and also fantasy, readers will let down their guard and not assume nearly as much about a main character, for example, or a setting. And so that it's like they'll be able to sort of get in the skin of what's going on more easily. So instead of something that might be more difficult to convey to a broader range of people with a very realistic setting. I'm not saying anything particularly revolutionary here, but so with more realistic setting versus a fantastical setting that has like it's believable, it feels like a world, but get people to examine things they just take for granted. That's the thing I'd love to do with speculative fiction in general. It's just get people to question things that they normally don't even think about. It's just like background noise, So why do we all love science fiction? That's a good place to start as any, I think.
Let me think. Well, going off of your comment, I feel like that is something that is really, really relevant for the world we're in right now. Basically, just because so much technological and scientific development is happening so quickly. And I think people are starting to realize just what a profound effect that has on like social and cultural stuff more than anything else. Technology has always affected how we interact with our world and how we how that affects like how we relate with each other. And I feel like just because stuff is starting to happen really quickly, we're noticing it more. And I feel like science fiction stories, whether they're like more allegory or soft or, more more literal, I feel like they're really good platforms to talk over those questions or like draw things out to their most logical conclusion. And that also relates to like intelligences and beings that aren't us, that aren't people. Because I do feel like that's something that we are basically starting to deal with and will only continue to do so.
A thought just occurred to me. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt your line of thinking, but something just occurred to me. The idea that things are getting like not just scientific improvement, but also social progress, hopefully, and it just like culture is because of just the increase, like geometrically, the increase of idea exchange with all the people we have on Earth and how fast we can communicate with each other these days. that it used to be that science fiction was more predictive, and it still is. But I think maybe these days it's almost like it overlaps to a staggering degree with reality. Like I think there's a new book called, I forget what it's called, but it's about a pandemic that just coming out. Was it this month? Maybe next month? I know that's like the first quarter of 2020, and you know it takes a while for books to get to the system. And when it was written, it was it was like a grim look at a virus like tearing through. Not to get too much into this, as I know everyone's sick of hearing about COVID, but it's just an example of before even it's like almost like it's not obsolete. It's no longer science fiction. It's just a look at our contemporary time.
There was this offer I always think about. I can't remember who it is right now, but they had a quote that seems really relevant. That was like, fantasy influences the emotional response to our present by talking about our past in a veiled way, and science fiction talks about the future in a veiled way, which influences our present on a technological and social way.
I believe that. I mean, I feel like there are lots of building blocks for understanding ideas in science fiction that come from fantasy or legend or classical things. I feel like a lot of ways that we interact with other living beings on the planet, like say for example, one idea that I remember thinking about a lot recently was I'm gonna have to look up to see exactly who said this on Twitter, but the guy who was talking about how once humanity like enters space and starts dealing with a lot of aliens, we're going to be the weird like hypersocial race with a lot of like client species, that's our thing, our social like able to interact with everyone, and that goes for how we deal with animals and other species on our planet. Like I
love that characterization of humans, by the way.
I'm going to see if I can find the guy who said it, because he basically just like classified humans as the party freaks of the future Galactic Alliance. And I feel like that's something that exists in a lot of our folklore when it comes to dealing with animals, as well as like semi-mythical, or celestial like beings. But I feel like that can also have repercussions for how we inevitably deal with like artificial or extraterrestrial constructs.
Well, my partner Harry, he talked about how humans have like a weird superpower in that we have fingers. Basically, like if like our ability to be able to pet things is like a bizarre superpower, because it turns out that everything that we encounter kind of likes being touched. And
that's amazing.
And like everything else has a hard time touching everything else, where they just don't think of it. But
isn't there also the joke of like humans are supreme because we can pet everything?
Yeah.
Oh, I've heard the thing that humans like succeeded evolutionary because we could throw shit really well. There's a strong hand motif occurring through our development, looks like. Also, if I may, I found the guy.
We slapped our way up evolution.
Crawling up the evolutionary ladder, literally, with our hands that we have.
If you want to talk about human evolution, I could definitely get into that, because that is a particular subject of interest of mine. But
you totally can. Quick sidebar, the guy who was talking about humans as the weird social party race of the galaxy, his name is John Levitt, or Leave It, maybe, because his Twitter handle is Leave It Alone. So you can find him. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Also, Arrow, if you want to finish that idea you had.
Oh, no. That was like the end of it, basically.
So we could directly, turn directly into the slapping.
Well, really quick, I want to let Monk and Emmy both say like why they enjoy sci-fi so much, why they choose to work in it, before we turn to a different topic.
Oh.
If you feel like it, no pressure.
Oh, Amy, you go first.
Okay. Well, I just want to make it clear, I don't normally write in a science fiction vein. I'm really fascinated by UFO stories, so I chose to pick a very like I laser honed my writing in on that topic. I do like sci-fi. I feel really guilty kind of being here because I do have aliens in my story, but I don't broadly write in the topic. I generally write horror and mystery. So, but I do like me a little bit of sci-fi. I'm just not super knowledgeable on the topic, so I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries.
I'm trying though.
No, I think that like the extraterrestrial or horror adjacent things is super legit because I feel like that's a lot of where horror comes from, is just interacting with things that like we'll never ever understand or comprehend, right?
Sure. Actually, yeah, since you don't generally work in science fiction, maybe you could speak to like the way you want to tell us one particular story, how only science fiction allows you to do that. Like, is there something different about working in science fiction versus most of the other stuff, or just like I think you'd have a unique perspective in this case?
I would say, like when I write in horror, I generally focus on human only stuff. So like all, the horror itself doesn't come from like monsters or whatever. I have a bad habit. If I'm going to write anything non-human, I'm going to fall in love with it. And I'm going to be like, oh, they're going to get married at the end of the story or whatever. So in trying human, a lot of the aliens want to look human or, pass for human. And I think that kind of lets me get away with allegories to like being genderqueer or trans, though I never intended that, but a lot of people seem to like go there with it, and I let them. It's fine.
Interesting. Isn't that happens? It seems like in every single time someone, sci-fi especially, like people will read into it, whether you intended it or not, they'll read into it like their own struggles or things that they want to understand. Like I've gotten the same thing, not the same thing as like this, not the same topic, but I've gotten people coming to me talking about Girlbot in that same way. That's really interesting.
Yeah, so I would say, being human in my main comic, Trying Human, is sort of like the best thing. Like everybody wants to be human or look human or hang around with humans because they get to do whatever they want. Though, socially we don't get to do everything we want all the time and everywhere we want. But the aliens have their own cultural holdbacks and problems that they have.
The grass is greener on the other side.
Yeah, exactly. So, the humans being human or being around humans or a part of human culture in my comic is, like that chalice out in the distance that they want to, drink from. They all want that. So, I would say in all my other comics, being human or being around humans is like real shitty. So, like, the sci-fi elements of my comic, I think are best epitomized in that way with the humans and the aliens interacting, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I'd actually have something kind of relevant to a similar discussion as Emmy, because I write Namesake, which is like hard urban fantasy, but since Namesake is built around portals, a lot of the monsters and general like events are actually inspired by quantum physics. Like the bad guy is essentially a metaphor for the heat death of the universe.
This is actually a great segue, and it's something I was thinking about. If we want to talk about this, I like the idea of talking about the intersection of science fiction and fantasy. Like the way, here's my thinking on it, just briefly. I like the idea, like the fantasy, thinking of it as almost like a nostalgia-based speculative fiction, and science fiction is like what do you want to call it? Like a visionary, maybe. It depends on the science fiction, maybe. But like looking forward into the future, or considering like alternative presence in some ways. I like the idea of the way we get the past and the future mixed up so much these days. The idea that like science fantasy is a way of like exploring the possibilities, like the infinite now. If I'm sounding a bit like a term paper, but you get what I mean. Like I want to talk about the way science fiction and fantasy can interact in interesting ways.
I just wanted to say I like science fiction because I think it's cool. I don't really have a deep thing to go along with that. Like I just thought, like everyone else, I know that like a really deep reason for like wanting to write this sort of thing, but I just thought it was pretty cool and it just seemed like something like it just do.
No, that's valid. That's valid, man. Like,
Yeah,
I
if
think
you
it's
connect
cool
to it
too.
emotionally. Yeah.
It's awesome.
Like if you're
Right.
connected to like a genre emotionally, that's your reason for picking it. That like that's already very interesting. I find.
I just tend to overthink things a lot, so I will just I'll pile ideas on top of other ideas. It's not like I have some deep reason for it. I just think about things way too much.
Monk, are there any like stories that you grew up with that you find yourself like drawn to or inspired by when you like are working on your current stuff? Are they sci-fi or are they just kind of from all over genre-wise?
Well, probably the one that had like the biggest effect on me was Erie, Indiana, which was like this show that
Oh
came
my
on
God.
in the 1990s. Like they came on NBC, but then ended up like canceling it. But it had like a second life on like Fox Kids, and that was like when I really watched it. It was about like this kid who moved from New Jersey to like this town in Indiana where weird stuff kept happening, and only he and his friend noticed. And like the collision of the fantastic and mundane really appealed to me. It's probably been like the largest impact on my work. Like I always like to try to like mix things together in that sort of way. So like, and so with
That's
a fan.
Yeah, I also have fond memories of Erie, Indiana. I watched a whole bunch of that when it was in syndication.
I haven't thought about Indiana in 20 years. That's like fascinating that
There was
like,
one episode where a girl could draw things and they came to life. They would become real. And I remember the episode more than anything because I was like, I want that power, but oh God, how would I use it? I was also like 11. So
The episode that two episodes that I remember is there's one where the main character gets a script in the mail, and it turns out that his entire life is a television show, and
oh my God.
he has to, and he figures, and he realizes that the cast is like planning to kill off his character, but like they don't think that they're killing off like a character. I mean, they think they're killing off a character. They don't know they're really killing off like this kid because they think he's like the cast member who's like actually in Erie, Indiana. So he has to fight his way into like them keeping his character on the show so he doesn't die for real. And then there was also like one episode where he sets his watch back in Erie, Indiana. Indiana didn't have daylight saving time at the time. So
I was going to mention this episode. Go on.
And he ends up being like thrown into like this parallel dimension that is like where everything goes that's left behind from time, where these garbage men roam around and they get rid of anything that's not supposed to be there, including people. It's like Langoliers, but
Yeah,
I was just gonna say that sounds
Yeah,
like a
yeah.
Stephen King story. So
we keep having the same brain going on here. I love it.
So what is it about? Was it like the vibe of that show, just like the, like normal human kids kind of dealing against this anthology of like supernatural phenomenon, like what that does to you? Like what was it about that was so impactful?
And well, like basically like everything sort of worked in like this weird kid logic. Like they have like this one episode where a living ATM machine ends up giving this one kid all of its money, and it ends up sending the entire town into a depression. And it's like, oh, if you think about it, this is like a way that a kid would explain how savings and loan led to the Great Depression.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
An evil ATM.
I love this. You mentioned the idea of kid logic. I love the idea of sort of surreal. It's not necessarily fantasy. It's more like magical realism almost. But thinking of that, it's almost like science fiction, but using kid logic. Because the idea that like a kid observes the way a world works, and they think this is a logical extrapolation of that, like you would, based on science when you're older. But the idea that that's like its own little world, ooh, I love that.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
I'm going to write that down.
I definitely think like, I guess that's sort of like this idea of, because a lot of times when people talk about sci-fi stuff that really like struck them. I think we come back with shows a lot like Erie, Indiana and stuff like, or Gravity Falls or that kind of thing, where like you're kind of like, what is science fiction? Because like it sort of bleeds, especially when you have urban fantasy tales. It's sort of like it sort of bleeds into like fantasy and horror. Like sci-fi is a genre that is extremely flexible. Like my favorite sci-fi movies are always sci-fi horror. Like they had recently that movie that sounded like it was based on the Lovecraftian story but wasn't, where that team of women goes into the evil alien forest.
Oh, Annihilation. Oh, wait, are you talking about Annihilation?
Yes, it's so good. It's so good.
That movie made me trip balls. I went to
that
see
movie
the
gave me like a nightmare for a week, and I don't easily freak out. But the books are really good, by the way. You should check out the books.
Yes,
oh yeah, the book is amazing.
Trilogy. They're wonderful, and I love. I don't want to get talking too much about this one particular movie, but yeah, it's great. I love it.
Yeah, the books are definitely great, but like the cinematography. Like I'm a cinema like nerd, so cinematography wise, I'm definitely addicted. Like if I could marry a movie, that's what it would be. But I think Annihilation is a really fun example too, because it shows like how horror and fantasy, because you have people like turning into trees, which is like very, changeling, like how all these genres, like the idea of imagination and the unknown sort of bleed into each other as genre. And sort of like what makes the protagonists interesting and relatable is how they sort of like tackle that unknown. At least in movies like Annihilation, that's what I felt. Like,
oh, absolutely.
I really got so attached to all the characters, and every time one of them would die, I'd be like, no, my babies! But also, I'm really happy to see this like alien bear thing, but also, what the
I
fuck?
love that thing.
I recently rewatched Annihilation like not 2 weeks ago, and one thing that I thought was interesting about that's germane to what we're talking about is that it's very deliberate, like the film version anyway. It's very deliberate about the fact that all the human characters have, self-destructive impulses, and that's like presented as, something that's like natural about being a human, is that you want to accomplish your goals, but you also feel compelled to like self-sabotage yourself. And the idea behind the entity in Annihilation is that it takes whatever is processed by it, including like natural life, human life, and just tweaks with it a little bit. So of course, like the humans are coming out with the idea that this is like malevolent because it's like human but slightly off. And at the very end they talk about how the person who got closest to understanding this thing realized that they may not have had any desire to hurt or really understand that the humans were there in the first place. Like they were just like, we have no way we're going to actually understand this thing or what it wanted, if it wanted anything at all. It's just really cool.
Yeah. And I feel you go
ahead. Okay, I'll real quick. What you were saying, Blue. I like the way they likened the shimmer and the effect it had almost like cancer, because cancer itself is not like, it doesn't have a mind, it's not evil, it's not trying to hurt you, it's just trying to exist. But it's harmful to us, and therefore, we fight it with, tooth and nail. So anyway, that's all I was going to say.
Yeah, it kind of relates to what I was going to say too, so it's good you went first. But I was kind of thinking about Annihilation too, to sort of bring in this theme of like sci-fi as like a genre crossing entity, because like a lot of the shimmer as a theme is closely related to the Lovecraft story, The Color of Space, where there's like a color thing that's really alien that falls into a well and then affects the entire forest around it as well as the humans in it. And in that, it also spreads like a cancer, but because the story is older and horror based, the focus is not the same. But then you have something like Annihilation that has sort of the same motif, but uses it in a more sci-fi way and in a more related to humans way, whereas the Lovecraftian story was written more as a mystery, which really made it relate to horror more. So there's sort of this idea of like the way stuff is constructed, you can have the same ideas that bleed from fantasy to horror to sci-fi, and they're kind of similar, but like what makes them different is sort of how you tackle it, how technology is part of it, how humans react to it, and how it sort of springs the story forward. Like usually a horror entity in a fantasy story will usually end things, but like a horror entity in like a sci-fi movie will usually spring things forward. Like Hal, if you want to go for a really old example, like Nasty Computer McGee.
What?
Hal from the the Odyssey.
Oh, okay.
Like Hal and every other computer that has only one glowy red eye.
Like AM.
Cool.
Yeah.
I have a cool. I thought of something to jump off of what we were talking about earlier. One last thing about Annihilation. The movie is actually a very fond Emerald City memory of mine because it came out, I want to say like 2 years ago at Emerald City time. And a whole bunch of us, like I'd say like 6 or 7 of us congoers all went to see it in the movie theaters at once. And that's a very intense movie to see in the theaters just because you're surrounded by all the sounds and everything. But being in a line of like fellow nerds just going like at like the same time was
I
absolutely worth it.
I wish I could have seen it with some people at Emerald City. I didn't have the time, unfortunately. I made sure to go see it before I went to Emerald City, though, I remember, because I knew it was getting sabotaged in the theaters. It would probably be out of theaters by the time Emerald City was over. And I was right. And if there's ever like a show near you that, you know, has like the surround sound and everything and the big ass screen, like go see it. It's like 2001: A Space Odyssey in the way that it really takes advantage of the theater, you know. It's just amazing. Like I said, I tripped ball watching it. Like it just, and without any kinds of drugs or anything. I was just from the audiovisual stimulus of it. It was crazy.
Yeah. If I may, I had actually thought of another really great like piece of the sci-fi canon that I was reminded of because both you, Diana, and you, Issa, mentioned like cancer as a motif. Have any of you read that trilogy of books by Octavia Butler? I think it goes by Lilith's Brood, but the books themselves are called like Dawn, Imago, and another one.
It's on my to-read list along with lots of other books.
That's a really interesting one because of that like conflux of genres, like not just like horror and science fiction, which I think Butler likes to dabble in a lot, but there's also like an eroticism and like a romance element to it that I think is very interesting. Basically, just quick Cliff's Notes for folks who haven't read it. It is told from the perspective of an Earth woman who is abducted at the end of I believe a global nuclear holocaust by a species on a ship that's interested in basically collecting up what remains of humanity to induct it into their pan-species collective, and they basically try and get the cool stuff from whatever species genes they get to make their civilization better. And for humans, the thing that the aliens talk about is man, you have this thing called cancerous cells, they just kind of keep growing and growing. That's cool. We want that. Let's induce you into our family and social structure. And the main character's just sort of okay, I guess. So there's this interesting romance element to what is extremely unsettling horror of the other, and also of humanity ending as you know it. It's a really good look into dealing on a regular and sensual basis with an alien, an unknown thing, and becoming it yourself and knowing your children will be more like them than like you. Oh, it's great. Butler rules.
Yeah, so it sounds like if you like Annihilation, you would like that. That sounds like a lot of thematic similarities.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Not dealing with all the same issues, but yeah. Like I said, it's on my to-read list. I haven't gotten to read it yet. Let me see. Oh, I thought of something because we'd asked about influences earlier. Something that influenced me an author who influenced me a lot when I was in elementary school was Bruce Coville, who wrote a lot of science fiction and fantasy books. I don't know if anyone else is familiar with his work, but
I think know about his work, but I only know him for Space Brat.
Yeah, I knew him most from my favorite series of his was, and it sounds ridiculous, is My Teacher is an Alien, which was like one of like, it was the first of like a series of like 4 or 5 books basically about pointing out, like it was using that thing where you had these kids who like they assume like, oh, our teacher's an alien, we figured this out, like obviously this is an invasion, this guy is evil, but they end up getting sort of taken on this like transgalactic and also like a deeper look into Earth itself, like look at the ways that humans don't use the resources available to them, like we squander so much, and how there's so many alien species who wish they had access to our potential, you know. And that's I think I tweeted about it, and Bruce Coville, he's on Twitter. He doesn't use it a lot, but he is on Twitter. But he favorited it, and now we are mutuals on Twitter, and it's cool. But
just
saying how
that's not like the series of kids books where like all the teachers or whatever are like Draculas or mummies or whatever. And all the titles are like Draculas don't drink lemonade or whatever.
No. This was a particular series about like an overarching plot. It wasn't like an anthology thing.
Wait.
No, I know what you're talking about.
Bruce Corville, did he write that goddamn unicorn series?
Yes.
What?
That was so good.
Yeah, Bruce Coville, he's amazing. Anyway,
I
was gonna say that like I was tweeting about this, and this was like I got introduced to him on Twitter. Is that those books, like, because there's like one part where they talked about like this one kid got taken to, because they're being teleported around the Earth, showing like all these assumptions you have about the way things work is not true. And this is like a 10, 11, 12-year-old kid. And like going to a storehouse full of food that was just going to waste, and where they had just seen people starve. Is it like there's plenty for everybody? It's just that you guys aren't distributing it. Like it just, that turned me into this little pinko middle schooler vegetarian who like, it just, not just in my work, but Bruce Coville had a big influence on just how I thought about the world. And I had to mention him because he's great. And yes, he's still around. Anyway.
I've never actually read his sci-fi stuff, but his fantasy stuff was a huge influence on me as a kid, because they would be in the Scholastic book fairs as translated French books.
Oh, yeah.
And I got to pick them up, and I was like, hey, this is about unicorns. And then 3 books later in the series, I was like, yes, mother, I need more. But
speaking of books that made you pinko kami, is that anyone read an Ian Banks book?
Again, on my to-read list. I really need to get to it, but...
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, if no one else has read them...
I've been so anxious I haven't wanted to read books. It's weird, but...
Yeah.
I'm illiterate. My ability to write is a statistical anomaly that's not based in actual fact. Yeah. I have like severe attention span problems, so it really, really hurts my ability to read. And I really want to listen to like audiobooks, but then you can't do anything while listening to audiobook. Like, I wish I had like another thing I could be doing at the time, but you can't multitask and everything I would need, and that really like cuts into that. But like, if anyone
when you're writing, I can't listen to anything when I'm trying to write. So listening to an audiobook would definitely get in the way.
Oh yeah, I can't imagine writing and listening. I have to listen to the most instrumental, like cool slow jam beats to chill out
like
to.
That, or
I need to have as much silence as possible.
That, or if you want to like read something at the same time while you're doing the audio, like if you want to look at something like online, you can't do that. And like I always want to multitask, and I gotta figure out a way to like shut that part of my brain off and just
going for a walk, maybe just like put it on like whatever device you have and just go for like a half-hour walk and listen to a chapter or 2.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea.
Or something I like to do sometimes is to just like set it up to play a certain chapter and just go lie down in bed and let it almost like seep into my subconscious, you know? It could be very relaxing. It's like your parent like reading to you, you know? It's nice.
This one's more of a bummer, but have any of y'all seen Captive State?
No, I don't think I've
Nope.
even heard of it. What is it?
Captive State was a movie that came out last year about aliens that had successfully conquered Earth and how humans are living with them now. And it's about John Goodman plays this guy who's trying to like squash out a rebellion that's trying to kill like the aliens that live under Chicago. And it's like this tense thriller that's actually about like how the sort of things humanity would need to do to deal with like a fascist totalitarian government, but it's like told through the lens of like an alien invasion that was successful instead. And it's very good, but like nobody watched it, and I don't think anyone remembers it even came out. And
I've never
like,
heard of this. It sounds. Is it
Me
good?
neither.
It sounds good.
yeah, it's really good. It came out last year. It came out this time last year, and me and my brother went to go see it, and like we loved it, and we were like, oh yeah, this movie is gonna become like our classic in the future, but for like all the wrong reasons. But like right now, it's just kind of being ignored, and it's it's really good.
I'll have to watch that with you sometime.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Could you say the title again just for the chat?
Captive State.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay.
And yeah, like, do you guys ever like try to illuminate some part of things that you're worried about through the use of science fiction or science fantasy? Like with Topside, I tried to touch upon environmentalism in some sort of way, and how poor resource management can lead to ruin. And like that's just like one example, but like have you guys ever done any of that stuff like that?
Well, with the book I'm working on right now, I have this like, I don't know. I'm very interested in the idea of like people being afraid of like robots or just like algorithmic stuff that like debases like humans living their lives and makes things worse and like fault it as a thing of the robots. But it's really like, I don't know. I'm very invested in the premise of like, it's robots are fine. It's just like, human, like human priorities are what's busted. And like, society is the way it is, regardless of how many algorithms we have. And yeah.
We live in a society.
Yeah, we do live in a society. I don't know. I think that's interesting. I feel like there is a very interesting conversation that we should be having about how we how we design the algorithms that kind of like run things and make things easier or harder for us. And I feel like it is not as like galaxy brain as it needs to be.
Yeah, I get what you mean. I was gonna say for me, I don't tend to set out like with a project like, okay, this is gonna be about, and I'm not saying this is what you said, but I don't tend to do like, okay, I'm gonna do a story about the dangers of like not taking care of the environment, or it's gonna be something about something philosophical. It's just whatever it is I'm worried about. It always leaks into it because I have anxiety. It's like I can't help myself that it's going to be about something one way or another, even if it's just the way people are with each other. It's just about connecting or not connecting. It's always going to be something. So I guess yes.
For me, I was going to say that I spend a lot of time in my comic focusing on like the interpersonal relationships of the characters. I feel kind of bad. I don't have any like broad scope topics that I hit on, but a lot of the characters are
Don't feel bad. You're doing like it's great. You're doing fine, and it's great.
Okay, cool. Okay, so a lot of the characters, especially the human ones, are in really sort of tragic or abusive situations, but they're comfortable there because it's kind of all they know. And in contrast to that, a lot of them are being abducted by aliens or have sort of not great relationships with the aliens, depending on how you look at it. And so there's kind of this low-key thing that gets brought up all the time about consent and what is consent and, why are we in this relationship and like, where are we going with this? And yeah, so that was kind of the big thing that comes up throughout. But like Diana said, I don't Am I okay to call you that? Can I call you Diana?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Almost called me mistress.
Okay, so
No, Diane.
as Mrs. Cheyenne was saying, I didn't really set out to write that, but that's sort of where I ended up. So yeah. Okay.
Didn't really set out to write that sort of thing. It just happened or just kind of emerged from the story. But then once I realized I pushed it that way anyway. And yeah, I think I'm like Diana, where wherever I'm feeling sometimes like seeps into the story. It happened really hardcore with Starhammer, which that ended up being about living up to expectations and then getting extremely lucky, so everyone thinks you're great, even though you might not actually be that great. And
so imposter syndrome.
Yeah, like you got into that, but like, we're gonna get into that more in like the coming up book. But like, yeah.
I think you and I both have a similar process for like when we're delving for ideas. We both work very heavily from our subconscious. I mean, I know everyone draws from their subconscious if they're telling like an authentic story, but I know for me, just because part of it is just having ADHD, the way I come up with ideas is just letting my subconscious like do a lot of the heavy lifting for me, and then just sort of like going in and seeing what's around. I will like, I'll do meditation, and I will sort of keep track of dreams that I've had. I also just whatever flits through my mind, because it's always like bubbling up in the back of my mind, whatever it is I'm trying to do, So it's, I don't know. I just think that's interesting personally.
I don't mean to interrupt this train of thought, but since we're about 13 minutes left in the stream, I thought it could be interesting to use this last chunk of time to maybe talk about non-human protagonists a little bit.
Yes, we did mention that at the top a bit, but yeah, let's get into that.
Get into that a bit more. We did a big detour towards things that everybody in this chat should read.
It's a conversation. It's a conversation.
This is not a complaint. Not a complaint.
Yeah. I mean, I could talk with you guys for hours about just whatever comes up in this line of thinking, but we only have so much time. So I'll say that for Girlbot, the original source of the character was actually like a triptych I did in like an experimental drawing class when I was at MCAD, the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. And it was just, she was doing these things you associate with like femininity, but because she looks basically as she does in the comic. So like she was shaped in this sort of like a female symbol you would see on like a door to a bathroom almost. So she's almost like a cookie cutter, but she's also so incredibly awkward and doesn't know how to express this idea of what she thinks she's supposed to be. And so there were a few different drawings of her doing different things. The things that she does basically in the first like 5 or so strips of the comic, that's what was in the original drawings, which I lost unfortunately. But I ended up using her as like a very like as a metaphor just initially to examine the idea of feeling alienated in the idea of femininity. And that was like kind of a way of me not realizing I was struggling with being non-binary. I call myself a stealth NB because I'm very visibly, physically female, but I am non-binary, and it's just the idea that your form doesn't inform your function as much as you think it does. And that was totally, I wasn't even thinking about it at the time. But she became this way of exploring not only that, but also just the way you interface with a world where you always feel a bit like a stranger. I have ADHD, which was my into it, but I've had people, more than one person, come up and say that they identified her with really hardcore with her because they felt that she had a lot of the aspects of someone who's on the spectrum as well, which was not something I intended. But I think it's as long as people don't take it as me saying that people on the spectrum are robots. And take it for the sympathetic way it's meant to be, because she is the main character and the point of view character. I think that's lovely, actually, and I couldn't have done it without her being a robot. It's just the whole package. It was needed. Anyway, my time is done.
It's really interesting how like being queer totally infuses everything that you do, and you might not realize it for years and years and years. Totally relatable. It's been interesting working on a comic that is similar, I suppose, in terms of a protagonist who starts off human and then ends up being like an android, a relatively like realistic humanoid android. I play with that idea of gender a lot as well, and just the idea of like feeling, I don't know, there's a couple of things that play with Oh Human Star anyway, both the idea of gender and like your interior like lived experience not matching up with like what people expect of you exteriorly, but there's also an idea of like legacy and the idea of just like the you that has been like famous or well known for something is like what sticks in people's heads and like gives you a kind of immortality as that in a similar way to like having a robot body does. And I think that's like something that like queer people who are extremely online probably think about a lot, just the idea of all of these like past iterations of you still existing, you know, even as you continue to like develop and change and like become more yourself. And I feel like that source of like anxiety is something that's like works both allegorically but also with the idea of like any kind of like immortal or long-lived thing like robots were, or vampires, but that's a different live stream, I think.
I guess we can tell people like, hey, chat, if you want us to also have a live stream about vampires, let us know.
I don't know, that's kind of a niche subject. I don't think anyone's into that.
Yeah. Nobody likes vampires.
Monk, how about you go?
Oh, well, like, the queer thing is interesting because, like, all my characters, not all my characters, but my protagonists are, like, Arrow Ace, and I didn't realize just how unhorny my writing it until, like, fairly recently. But, like,
you've had issues with this. We've had talks about, like, feedback you've gotten.
And it's just like, yeah, like, oh, this is just totally... It's not even shippable. That's how unhorny it is. And it's just like, but like, yeah, I don't have any protagonists that are non-human, but they're like, there are characters that are non-human in Topside. And, I basically just sort of like modeled how they would work. Like, basically like how I would just, I've lost myself. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Eddie, if you want to take it for a few minutes, and Monk, you can take a few minutes to think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Well, most of the aliens I write, well, all the aliens I write are from ufology lore. So, alien abductees talk about them in their books and whatever. And so I had a big pool of literature to pull from for writing them, but the hardest, there's most of the species are sort of human-ish, not human-looking, but their personalities and the way they behave and talk and whatnot are, fairly compatible with like humans and socially and culturally and whatever. But the one species, the Greys, which everybody knows the Greys from like that icon on your phone and shit. But they were the hardest to write because they don't have emotions, they don't see color, they don't dream, they don't sleep, they don't eat like we do. They have really nothing in common with anything I've ever written before. And they're by far the hardest to write because a lot of the Greys in my comic, they're sort of hive-minded, but they also sort of lust after some of the characters and whatnot. And it's so hard to write lustful, non-emotional characters. And so a lot of my time is just spent writing dialogue for them and testing out, like, does this sound right? Does this feel right? Because it's like I always have to get to the edge of them about to feel something or yearn for something, and then I have to, like, pull it off right at the end. Like, I have to pull them back because I know they can't go all the way with that. And I think they were the hardest non-human protagonists in my comic to write. The rest of them are all just like dopes, and they're really easy to write. So
I like that dynamic. It's just that's why, for example, the characters like Spock and Data in Star Trek, they evoke so much emotion, is because you want to bridge that gap. So it's like you almost project more of your own emotions onto them, if that makes any sense. I've always loved characters like that, you know?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's funny that like Data is probably like such a horny character just because of like all the feelings around him, even though he's like a like deliberately not horny like fictional figure. I find that fascinating. There's a lot of like good horny dilemmas when it comes to like storytelling.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting because a lot of the Greys, I noticed like the readers were really reading into the Greys, and I'm like, but I never had him say that. She never did that. You know, they never did that or talked about that. But I think people project on them because they're so truly neutral. Like they don't even have like genitalia or anything, and even their motives are completely neutral in regards to the humans. Whether nothing they do is good or bad, it's just what they're doing. You know, and they have no regard for humanity.
That is interesting. Yeah.
I wanted to say real quick, just as a metaphor for what we're talking about, I don't want to feel like people who are ace are like being alienated here. So not pun not intended. Just
I'm actually like, ace and I feel fine, so we're good.
Well, okay, but still, I want to say that something else we could compare it to, instead of just thinking of it as like a lust, you know, this intense desire, like a visceral desire for something, as a hunger. It's not just the way people say they're hungry for something, and that people often use it to describe lust. But like everyone feels hunger. Everyone knows what that feels like. So maybe that's a better description.
Desire is not necessarily sexual. Like you can desire.
I know.
Things.
I'm just trying to divorce it from that completely.
Yeah,
that's true. Saying. That kind of nuance is definitely like possible and like fun to explore.
That's why I like desire as a term better than lust, because desire is like, it can be extremely it can really take over a person, but it's not necessarily sexual. Like you could have desire for like a career, or desire for like power or fame. It's not necessarily tied to sexuality, although what's fun about the term desire is that it can be. Like you can have desire for fame in a way that, you know, it's enticing to you in that way, but it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I didn't mean any offense or anything by it. It just I had like two characters that.
No.
Okay, I'm sorry. I have ace characters and whatnot. I was just talking about those two. I'm sorry. I didn't mean anything by it.
It's about challenging assumptions, you know. That's one of the reasons why we're having this discussion. You know, we use these ways to describe things, and we don't think of them as being like exclusionary in any way, but it can be a little bit sometimes, and I think it's worth thinking about. I'm not trying to get on anyone's case.
Oh no,
I feel very attacked right now. No, I'm cool.
No, there's totally a Venn diagram of like just like allegories, especially when it comes to robots. Like I know it was mentioned earlier that like there's a really, you know, complex relationship that lots of people often have if they're like neurodivergent and they're like relating with robot like protagonists, like both for good and for ill. And I feel like that's also like a Venn diagram with like desire and like a bunch of different ways. Like I feel like there's just a lot of like really interesting things that are intersecting that can be done, you know, like in a way that's refreshing and interesting, or that's like really needed, or stuff like really clumsily. Like there's just a lot of interlocking parts with when it comes to robot allegory, I think, and like extraterrestrial allegory too.
Well, it's on my clock. It's now 3:00. I really enjoyed this discussion. Oh yeah, Monk, did you have anything else you wanted to add there?
Oh yeah. Well, basically, the characters that I have that are not human, like Kevin, who's like a shape-shifting mirage-like being, and like I just kind of modeled him after like a really eager to please kid, and I was just like, wait, what would a kid who can be anything be like, and if he wanted to endear himself to like people, and it would be like a really eager to please kid who just, you know, wants to be loved and wants everyone to like him. And then there's Karina and Lumi, who are like a shark in like a robotic harness, and Lumi, who's like a walking light bulb. And I actually was inspired by Zoe and Wash from Firefly a bit there, because they're like, and there's like a married couple that just gets along really well and is able to make the sort of jokes that comes with being in a relationship for years and years. And I think this might be the only kind of relationships I can write because I cannot figure out how to write other kinds. And that was the thing.
Well, I'm always around for feedback and helping out with relationship type writing because I'm actually decent at that. I have to, don't want to toot my own horn too much, but anyway.
So we have reached the end of the hour, so I'm going to do the little closing thing now. So first of all, thank you everybody for coming. To remind people who tuned in halfway, the people in the stream were Diana Nock, author of Girlbot and Wonderlust, Gian Monk, which is the author of Starhammer, Blue Delaquanti, which is the author of Whole Human Star, and Amy Bittner, who is the author of Trying Human. Some of these books do have print versions, which you can get in the Hiveworks store. Right now we've got a sale going on for the code Spring 2020. Gives you 10% off, so please check it out and use that. And if you're tuning in on Twitch, again, if you scroll down, we've got a couple of links towards different events and sales going on at Hiveworks, and we've got 2 Kickstarters running right now. One for the first book of Alice in the Nightmare, and one for the first book of Among Us. The first being a YA story that takes place in Wonderland, and the second being a romance between 2 girlfriends that is super adorable. So, and to say again, we've got streams like this going on for the entire weekend, so please keep updated on our Twitter, and you can see the themes and the people participating, and all of these are recorded and will be eventually uploaded to our YouTube channel, so definitely look forward to that as well. So, thanks for coming. If anybody has closing statements among the people who are part of this, I'm going to give them the floor to finish up, and then we're going to close the stream.
I just wanted to say thank you guys so much for agreeing to do this. We kind of threw this together almost at the last minute, but it turned out great, and I love talking with you about science fiction and various related topics.
Yeah, thanks very much for having us on. I had a good time.
Yeah, I hope we can do this some more in the future. That would be awesome.
Well, the plan is to do several of these. Hiveworks is just going to keep doing these on a monthly basis, and we have a lot of topics that we're actually going to do probably series about. For instance, for fairy tales, we were already talking that we could divide this up on almost 10 episodes. So we're probably going to do a deep dive for sci-fi as well, and invite you guys back and other people and sort of do a mix. So definitely everybody sort of keep posted, because I get the feeling these podcasts are going to get pretty intense.
I can hear Pete meowing in the background.
Is that Pete?
Yeah.
Hey, Kat. Yeah, I just wanted to say, thanks for having me, and I'd be up to do any more of these, especially deep dives on writing techniques or art or print or any of the more mechanical.
I would talk with you about alien lore.
Yeah, definitely. I don't want to go off, but I'm very knowledgeable, and I know a lot of people in the know and all that shit. So yeah, we could totally talk about that shit. But
we're gonna have to make a BuzzFeed Unsolved style dive into aliens, but with comic artists.
Oh god. But yeah, I'll be working on my pages on Twitch forever and ever all weekend. So if you guys have free time and have no Hiveworks shows going on and you want to hang out, that'd be cool. So yeah, I'll see you guys around then. Go to tryinghuman.com, read my comic. Okay, bye.
Yeah, thanks for having me too. You can buy my book on Amazon, or I guess it's in some bookstores, but yeah, go to Amazon or
Can you drop the title again, just for readers?
Topside. It's called Topside, and it's by me and my friend Harry Bogosian. Also, Harry streams Starhammer pages on his Twitch, twitch.tv/Harry Bogosian every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern time. And you can read my comic at starhammercomic.com. We just got back into it. We're starting with book 2. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Oh, real quick, one last thing to plug. Everyone plug your Patreon before we end this.
Ideally, if you could paste it in the chat, I think that would...
I'll do that. My name is long in Italian, so I will just go ahead, post it in the chat so it's spelled properly.
Yeah. I'm going to end... when we do the YouTube, when you post this on YouTube, there's going to be a little transcript too, so that we can, so people who watch the video at a later date can be like, boy, I would have liked having that chatter on. So don't worry, it'll all be there. So thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you so much for making this possible. It was a good time.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, no worries. I love doing this stuff. All right. Please keep posting links in the chat. I'm going to leave it on for the next 5 or so minutes, but I'm going to end the stream now and the recording as well. So goodbye, everybody. See you in the next stream. It's going to be at 5 p.m. East today.